Welcome back to Management 2020. The goal of this video is to talk about citation formatting style as it pertains to business communication documents. So we'll talk about the need for style guides, talk about using sources in our work, and make the distinction between in-text and end-of-text citations, and finally talk about the use of citations in presentations. So what is a style guide? Well, style guides tend to have at least the first two components here. Formatting standards for how documents should look, things such as line spacing, type of font, font size, margins, but also citation standards. So how should external works be referenced within the document? Style guides might also have information about grammar patterns, vocabulary choices, mechanics, including capitalization and punctuation patterns. And sometimes style guides may include visual standards, such as how official organizational logos or colors should be used. The first two are very common in a wide variety of style guides. The others might be more specific to an organization's style guide. For example, how they prefer to capitalize words or products that are part of their portfolio. So the most common style guides that you may have already heard of is maybe the MLA style guide, the Modern Language Association style guide. This is used primarily in the fields of humanities, writing about literature or the arts. And the middle one here has the American Psychological Association. This one's used primarily in social science and some science fields. And then the last one here, Chicago Manual of Style, is used a lot in history writing. But the one we're going to focus on is the APA style guide, because this is commonly used for business communication, both in academic settings. So if you're reading articles, journal articles written by business researchers, they'll use APA, but even in the professional side, using a standard for businesses to use internally and externally, they're probably following, at least in general, APA style. So why do we need a style guide? Well, the first thing is it can help guide a reader through a text because they know what to expect. And since they know what to expect, writers also know how to organize their information to meet those general standards. And when we're using sources, then a style guide is helpful because it gives a consistent way to give credit to those authors. And then it also, in addition, provides detailed reference information so readers can follow up on those sources. So all of this is about building the credibility of the author or the creator. They're following accepted standards. It helps them look professional, and they're using sources in an accepted way that makes them look well-informed and well-prepared. So when should we use a source in our writing? In general, we should use a source if the information we learn from that source is information we didn't know before. So then we want to show readers or our audience where to follow up to find more about that. And we should also do this when the information is not commonly known and accepted, right? So if we say United States is a country, that's commonly known and accepted. So we probably don't need to provide a source for that. But if we're talking about a topic where we think our audience may not already know or may not already accept this information, there may be some controversy about it or different opinions about that claim, then providing a source lets them know where that evidence is coming from so that they can investigate that source in more detail. So let's talk about in-text citations following APA style. In-text citations are citations that are part of the sentences and paragraphs that we write. And there's two main kinds of in-text citations, parenthetical and narrative. So first, let's talk about parenthetical citations. These citations come at the end of sentences in parentheses. That's why they're called parenthetical. So we have a normal sentence that makes a claim, shares a fact, shares some opinion or a piece of information. And then at the end of that sentence, before we get to the period, in parentheses, we'll provide the name of the author, or in this case, authors, and then the date of publication. And this serves as a signal or a shortcut to the readers that this statement is supported by this source. Now, in this case, what I provided here is probably a summary or paraphrase. So Domingos and Gomez did not use these exact words, but this idea does come from them. Now, I put the whole thing in quotation marks just to show you if I were quoting from someone's paper who had provided an in-text citation, then that whole sentence comes. What you'll notice is I've also bolded the parenthetical citation. That is not normal. You would not do that in your own paper, but I'm doing it here to highlight that that's the parenthetical citation. Now, a narrative citation is when the citation becomes part of the sentence's grammar. It's not just something tagged on at the end right before the period. It's part of the sentence. So here's one example. You could use a phrase like according to. So according to Domingos and Gomez, 2005, there was no loss in productivity, but there was a gain in employee morale as a result of the 4-day work week. Okay, so I'm using that phrase according to, along with the author's names, to introduce that this idea is coming from them. So instead of just tagging it at the end of the sentence, the authors become part of the grammar of the sentence. Now, another way to do this, instead of using the phrase according to, you could use a verb to show that the authors have stated, reported, said, what other kind of reporting verb you'd like. So in this case, Domingos and Gomez, 2005, reported a gain in morale and no loss in productivity when companies adopted a 4-day work week. So whether you use parenthetical or a variation of the narrative ones, you are showing the reader that this idea comes from this source. So when we do in-text citations, we're probably doing one of three actions: summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting. Now, summarizing is taking the main idea of a work, or maybe at least the main idea of maybe a paragraph or a section, and explaining that main idea in fewer words than the original sources. So if I'm summarizing a whole article, instead of quoting 12 pages, I might just summarize it in one sentence. What is the main idea of this article or its main takeaway? When I do a summary, I need to provide to the reader in my in-text citation the author's family name and the year of publication. So, for example, here, overall, companies who adopted a 4-day work week improved employee well-being without losing productivity. That's one of the main takeaways from this article. And so at the end, I provided, in this case, I chose a parenthetical citation. At the end of the sentence, before I get to the period, I provide the names of the authors and the date. Now, paraphrasing involves, it's usually when we want to talk about a specific detail from an article. So it's going to be similar length. It's not really a summary. We're just restating something that is shared within the original work, but we were using our own language and our own grammar. And the reason why we probably want to do this is because we want to maybe adjust the idea that the original author shared to match better our organization, our grammar, our voice. So in a case of paraphrasing, we also provide the author's family name and the year. So perhaps I'm summarizing a specific detail from this article. It says the majority of companies that participated in the pilot found that collaboration between teams improved. And then again, at the end of the sentence before the period, I provide, in this case, a parenthetical citation. Now, quoting is the third option, and quoting actually, when it comes to social science and business communication, is the least commonly used strategy for integrating sources into writing. Now, when you're doing literature, it's one of the most common ones because when we write about literature, the exact words matter, right? The words of a poem or the description of a character. We want to highlight the original author's use of language. That's not usually as important in social science writing like business. But if we do have a reason to use a direct quote, then we want to use the specific wording of the original source. So we choose which exact words we want to borrow. We put those words in quotation marks, and then we provide, again, the author's family name, the year, and this time the page. The page is important if the source has pages. Now, sometimes more internet and digital sources no longer use pages. In that case, you wouldn't provide it. But if the source has page numbers, you'll want to provide it. Generally, page numbers are not used in summary because you may be summarizing something that's more than one page. Paraphrasing could use a page number if you wanted. It's not required, but it is required with quoting if the source has page numbers. So you let the readers know specifically what page of the article or the book that this quote came from. So in this case, I'm using a narrative citation. According to Domingos and Gomez, the data, and then here starts the quote, reinforce the viability of the model to promote a healthier and more productive work environment, ending the quote and then providing the page number. Now, if I were using instead a parenthetical citation, I could just start the sentence with the data and then my quotation, reinforce the viability, and then end with environment, close quotes, and then in the parentheses, I'd have all that information, Domingos and Gomez, comma, 2025, comma, page 4, end parentheses, and then the period. So in-text citations are helpful to flag to the readers that an idea or a quotation comes from a specific source. But that's not enough information usually to find the source. Even with Domingos and Gomez, which is 2 authors and a date, there still could be lots of people named Domingos and Gomez who wrote an article or a book in 2025. So we need more reference information than just the author's family name and the date. And that's where end of text references come in. So the in-text reference lets us know the information has come from a source, and then we go to the references page at the end of the document that will provide the full reference information. And the full reference information consists of the author's name, the date, the title of the work, and then some kind of publication information. And we'll look at those in a second. Now, items in the reference page for a typical APA referencing page list the sources alphabetically by author's family name. So A last names come before W ones. There are other citation styles that might list things in the order that they appeared in the text, such as footnotes, but that's not typical for APA style. So here, if I had 2 authors, one was named family name, the other one's named last name, family name's going to come first. Now, with this example using family name, you'll notice that the author's first name, we just use the initial in APA. Now, MLA style would use the full name written out, but APA style is just a little more concise. It just uses the first initial. Then you put the year in parentheses. Then you put the title, if it's a book, put the title of the book in italics, and then followed by the publisher's name. If it is a journal article, like our second example here, okay, last name, and if there are 2 given or 2 first names, like a first name and a middle name, then again, still use initials for both of them, the year. Now, the title of the article in this case is not italicized, but the title of the journal that it comes from would be italicized. You provide the volume number, the issue number, and then the page numbers that that article comes from. If available, you'll also provide the DOI, which is like a URL that is specific to that article. So there is a lot to learn about how to cite sources accurately and appropriately, both in text and end of text, and different kinds of sources follow different patterns. It can be a lot to memorize how all of it works and whether something is italicized or whether there's periods or commas, and you're not expected to memorize all of that. As you use it more and more, you'll become more familiar, but make reference to sources that can help you with that. So for example, the Purdue Online Writing Lab or Purdue OWL APA, those are some good keywords to search in a browser search engine. Rather than write out this whole URL address, just search for Purdue OWL APA. And you'll get to a page that will provide both APA formatting information, but also the referencing and citation styles. How to do in-text citations, how to do end-of-text citations. Lastly, we want to talk about citations in presentations. So I think most of us understand that citations are important in writing, but they're also important in presentations. It builds your credibility as a researcher and as a professional. Although maybe an internal presentation just to your team, maybe there isn't an expectation to provide citations there. If you are presenting externally, maybe to a client, maybe to another partner organization, and giving a formal presentation, and certainly if you were ever to present at a conference, a professional conference, you would be expected to use citations in your presentation. And so you would use in-text citations on the slides that include data, figures, quotes, or other borrowed information, which again is just using author name and the date. And then at the end of your slideshow, you'd have a references page that has the full citation. Now, generally, presenters aren't going to present that references page. But if for whatever reason they were sending their sources to someone else, or if at the end of the presentation someone comes up and says, hey, I really appreciate that data you shared, I would like to be able to use that data as well, then you can say, okay, here, let's look at my reference page so you can see how to find that source. So it's good to get in the habit of whether we are writing or whether we are presenting. If we're using information that comes from sources, always remembering where those sources came from, recording that reference information, and then using in-text citations to signal to the readers where that information has come from. It showcases our credibility as a communicator and our professionalism. So in our video, we defined style guides, talked about the use of them, distinguished between in-text and end-of-text, and also talked about the importance of using citations not only in writing, but also in our presentations.